Hey friends, it's day 97 of Russia's invasion into Ukraine, and you are still here. You're praying, you're raising up prayer, you're sharing these videos, and together we're seeing unbelievable direct answers to the prayers we've been praying. And as a result, we've stayed encouraged. We fought off fatigue together, and we're seeing God move. And we're getting, I'm just so proud of how so many of you have been praying. You've been asking God. You've been getting strategies. You've been sharing those strategies with one another, coming alongside each other, praying together. God is on the move in Ukraine, and he's only just begun. We said this before. We know that the call of God on Ukraine is to be a tinderbox for God's move in the earth, to reveal his glory and to set Russia aflame with the gospel, and that all of Ukraine and Russia would ignite the world. We know that's his call. And so we're not going to settle for being impressed with the plans of the enemy or the plans of Putin. We're impressed with God's plans. And so we're going to continue to be encouraged if we remember the things he's done. And that's where I need you. This is your time. I want to tag you in. I've actually pre-recorded this because I'm actually in a place without any internet or Wi-Fi or cell service. And so you guys are the ones who are going to bring the testimonies. So if you've got testimonies you found on the internet or seen online about what God is doing, the direct answers of prayer in the midst of all the horrible things that are happening in Ukraine, I want you to put those in the comments. Come on, this is your time. You share, you put those forward, you share, go ahead, put links, put videos, whatever. We're going to trust that you guys are going to bring together the testimonies that are going to encourage us all. And then, as you guys are encouraged, I want to encourage you to share things you're seeing that God wants to move on. Again, now I got to tell you this. We're not wanting to impress people with darkness. We're wanting to be impressed with how God wants to confront darkness, right? And that's where you jump in and you share those. Now, I can tell you right off the bat, barring some unforeseen, shocking development, the battle in Donbass is still very crucial. The people that are fleeing, the people who are getting out, still essential to pray into those. So please don't quit on that. Also, where Russia is trying to push in Zaporozhye, towards the city of Zaporozhye, pray for that. And also, to hold the line in Kherson. And so those things are to pray for, but give us those prayer requests. But in the meantime, what I want to do for y'all is I want to give you some background on Ukraine and on geography to help you to better, more effectively pray, get a better picture of what's going on. So one of the things that's going around the internet is that Ukraine's not even a country. That's Putin. That's Putin. Now, the reality is, Ukraine, very similar to many other nations in Europe and the United States, is a multi-ethnic nation by its fundamental reality. So part of this goes back to geography. And so this is where I'm going to bring you guys in, all right? So what we have in geography is we've got Crimea down here has been a traditionally Muslim area, the Crimean Tatars. There are remnants of many of the Turkic peoples and the Mongol horde and all that stuff. And so over in the middle area right here has been, there's Kyiv, right? That's where Russia began. But long ago, the center in the 1500s, the center of Russia moved to Moscow, and Kyiv was left out of the picture. Over in the far west region is the Carpathian Mountains, and that goes right up to Romania and Slovakia and Poland. And so that area, this area right here has switched hands many, many times over the course of Ukraine's history. So it's been part of Poland. It's been part of the Lithuanian Duchy. If you didn't know that was a thing, it was a very big thing at one point. It's been part of the Galician Empire kingdom. There's just so many different parts of where it's been, and so many different people groups. But also during during the final days of the Russian Empire, Prime Minister Stolypin actually imported a whole lot of German settlers, Mennonites, particularly over into eastern Ukraine. And so you're going to see, I think that's why many things are called Lehman. But there was so many. Also, you had the Polish Jews. You had all these different people groups living together. And as a result, now Putin says they're not really a nation. Well, then the United States isn't a nation because we're made up of all these different cultures bringing all their different parts. And Russia has worked very hard over the last 20 years of Putin to drive a wedge between those who primarily speak Russian and those who primarily speak Ukrainian. And so as a result, one of the dividing line here is this river Dnieper. That river Dnieper is one of the great rivers of Europe, and it mainly on this side is Russian speaking, and on this side is Ukrainian speaking. And so Putin has tried to create an artificial wedge where there wasn't one. During the Soviet Union, in 1920 and 1919, starting in 1917, the Ukrainian people actually made their own separate. They separated. They were not part of the Soviet Union. They were the only part of the Soviet Union that the Soviets, the communists, actually had to conquer. They were conquered in 1921. And so why? Because they were fundamentally not communist. They were made up. One of the characteristics of the Ukrainian people is they are hard workers. They're independent. One of the great things is in the Dnieper, there was an island. There was a group of people in the southern part of Ukraine, all the way stretching into Russia, called the Kazaki or the Cossacks. And the Cossacks are they were actually used for the personal guard of the emperor, of the Russian emperor. They were wild soldiers. Their famous thing was they were brave to the point of insanity. They do these swords. You look up Cossack sword dance. I mean, one of the famous things was a real Cossack could cut a man in 4 parts before his body hit the ground, like. The Cossacks actually led the only successful horse-mounted attack on a tank brigade. In World War II, a group of Cossacks actually took out an entire brigade, I think like 40 tanks, German tanks in the war. They're that insane. They just really, so part of that culture in Ukraine is of bravery, and whereas so many of their folk stories tell stories of facing impossible odds and succeeding, particularly not of the wealthy, but of a working man, like a blacksmith or someone rising up and bringing truth and justice into difficult situations. And so this is they again, they had all these strong German Mennonites, all these Jewish families, whatever. And so one of the things that Stalin did when he took over in 1930 was immediately stamp out the independent farmers because they didn't want to be collectivized. And he actually created what's called the Holodomor, where millions, I think 10 million people died of hunger on farms, because they literally just came in and took all their food, and they would then wall them up in towns and not let them leave. And then when the villages where everybody was dead, they would destroy the village, plow it under as if it never existed. And so Stalin, so many ways, hated Ukraine because it held out against this Soviet ideal. And Putin has really drawn from that. The same thing is, we want the Ukrainian land, we don't want the Ukrainian people. And so a lot of that, again, comes back to geography. Now, let me explain again, because what you've got is you've got different zones. As I mentioned, in the far west, far west, you have the Carpathian Mountains out here. Whoop, there we go. Out here, we have the Carpathian Mountains. That's Lvov right there. And in the central south portion, you have all this wheat growing area. And then over in the west, in the east, you have the area of a lot of the minerals. So minerals such as natural gas, coal, steel, iron, and other minerals. And so out of that is the industrialization. So that's why all this area is heavily industrialized, because they had the coal to power, they had the steel to make. And so so most of the wealth of Ukraine was made in these areas. And so that's part of the reason why Russia went for them. Interestingly enough, the town where in 2014 the first revolt happened of the Donetsk People's Republic, quote unquote, the Russians, was the town where Shell Oil had discovered the second largest natural gas deposits in Europe, second only to Norway's, and those natural gas were enough to supply Europe. Russia didn't want that. Because Ukraine lies between Russia and Europe, and they run their pipelines of gas directly through Ukraine. And so if they did that, then Russia would have nobody to sell their oil to. And so Russia, that's part of the reason why Russia started all this. It was over natural gas and other resources, and Ukraine wanting to be separate. Now, the thing is, down here, this was originally Crimean Tatars for a long time. They couldn't be conquered. That was part of what the Crimean War was about. But what it was really going on with there is that what happened is during World War II, the Crimean Tatars fought. Many of them fought because they hated the Soviets. They hated Russians so much. They fought back, and what they did is after about 80% of them sided with the Germans, and to get rid of the Soviets. Well, after the war, Stalin was so ticked at them, he uprooted the entire Crimean Tatar population and shipped them to Kazakhstan. Many died on the way, died while they were there. It was brutal. They've lived in this sunny, warm area, and then they were sent to the blistering, cold, frozen plains of Kazakhstan. Then they were eventually allowed to come back. So there are a few of them. But in the meantime, all the Russians moved in. And so this was the number one Soviet vacation spot, one of the truly lovely Russian spots. And they loved. Another one, even going back to Tsarist times, was Odessa. Odessa had a strong Jewish population, had a very strong Russian. That's a lot of the Russians loved to vacation there, to go south in the winter, to go to Odessa. Some of the great writers, Chekhov wrote there, so many. And so Russia, this is a predominantly Russian area. Well, guess what? When the war hit, even those who were Russian said, no, we're Ukrainian. Up to this point, we didn't know we were Ukrainian. Now we know. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why Putin's so ticked at Odessa, is because they expected Odessa to welcome the Russians with open arms. They were like, you're Russian. Well, no. And in Crimea, the Crimean, many of the Russians there initially accepted the Russians. Now they're very sad they did, because they've suffered greatly. It's created huge economic loss. The Russians who stayed, and so there's where I want to switch to the war geography. Okay, so this blue line I've created with Post-it notes. Don't you love that? It's really the area that Russia had invaded in the north, coming from Belarus and coming from Russia. And so, they got up here. Here's Irpin and Boya and Borodyanka. And then they surrounded Chernihiv completely, and it's just general. They didn't take a lot of this area; they just swept in. But then they pretty much had surrounded Sumy, but they were completely driven out. Right? We celebrated together. How stunning was that reversal, right? The beginning of April, they were driven back out. But then in the middle, right, you had all of. They still were holding all this area, right, behind the pink. And so what they did was, and actually it's interesting that the Z and the V that you see, they actually spoke to the different armies. The Z was for the Zapad or Western armies, and the V was for the Vostok or Eastern armies. And so this pink line is the line that they have fought, they've held. Most of that they've held since the very early days of the war. They made very, very, very little movement. And so as a result, this whole swath of Ukraine is threatened, right? And so all of these people fleeing from Kharkov, fleeing from Donetsk and Lugansk. This is Lugansk, this is Donetsk, that's the fleeing, and from Mariupol, Melitopol, they fled up to Dnipropetrovsk. It used to be Dnipropetrovsk. It's now Dnipro. And they did us a favor. It was too hard to say Dnipropetrovsk. And so this city of Dnipro, where our friends Vladimir and Lilia are, that's why there's been this flood of refugees. And then oftentimes, in the early days of the war, they would then move to the west, and then some would take the southern route to go down through Chernivice, and into Romania, and some further on then down to the Balkans. But most of them went all the way to the west, out through Lvov to Poland. Now they're beginning to come back, but those are starting to come back, especially the people from these areas. But as the Russians move forward here, many of those refugees are fleeing rapidly to Dnipropetrovsk, and they already had 220,000 refugees living in Dnipro is a city of 1 million. They had an additional 220,000. Now, some of the people had fled Dnipro in the early days because they were afraid. Those are coming back, but still 220,000 refugees, and it's growing. It's really growing. Because now, if you look here, we have this highway going this way through a city called Pavlograd. And if you guys remember, in the last few days, the Pavlograd has been bombed multiple times because that's also a rail hub. There's a railway that goes up like that to supply the entire front and to get refugees out. And they've bombed it heavy duty because those supplies are the keys to the Ukrainians both holding and then being able to be set up to actually attack. Now, one of the things that the Ukrainians have been doing, right, is as they've freed up Kharkov, they are trying to push towards this town of Vovchansk and Kupiansk. Vovchansk is a rail it's a key point on the rail line coming from Moscow, Kursk, and Tula, the big military factories, and they're bringing them in. I'll tell you this. This just came in is the degree to which Russia is scraping the bottom of the barrel is they have a video of Russians sending in T-62 tanks. Why is that? T-62 tanks haven't been made since 1975. I mean, they're really, the Soviets never threw away anything. They would just mothball it, and now they're bringing them out. I mean, in one place in Kherson, I saw where the guards were using a cannon from Tsarist times, little tiny cannon. It was just ridiculous. But anyway, so they're threatening, the Ukrainians are threatening this key thing. And Kupiansk is the key staging area for so much of those supplies. And so the Ukrainians are trying to push hard towards Vovchansk and Kupiansk, and they're having a hard time of it. But that's their goal to cut off. But over here, you're seeing they've been pushing hard. They pushed to encircle this area, right? Severodonetsk and Lvivchansk. And so they're coming down here from Izum to threaten that. And they're trying to cut all of this off. This is what they really like to do. But their big plan, though, is to come up here. They're massing massive troops here south of the city of Zaporozhye. The city of Zaporozhye is about 750,000 sitting on this huge dam that supplies so much of the electricity to this central part of Ukraine. And these troops are massed here to push for Zaporozhye. They've been bombing it pretty heavily. And their real goal is to do all these little encirclements. They've been trying to do an encirclement here. That hasn't been working, so they've been pushing up from Popasna towards this way. But they've also would really like to do is cut all the way from Izum over to Dnipro, and from Zaporozhye up to Dnipro. And over here, they would love to be able to push up from Kherson up to Kryvyi Rih, and then over to Dnipro. So over here in Kherson, if they can get all this settled, right, particularly Zaporozhye, these encirclements, they'll be super happy for a moment, but then they're going to push. They really want to push for Odessa. They want to grab this. They want to deny Ukraine 100%, deny them access to the Black Sea, and all of this grain growing area, to hold the world hostage. And then they want to connect with Moldova and take all of Moldova. This is what they'd really like first for this stage. That's what they'd really like. And one of the things that's been said is, well, we got to negotiate, let the Russians have a little something, and just they'll let the grain go or whatever. And I believe it was Romney who said, allowing Putin to save face, letting him get a little something is like making a deal with a cannibal, so that he'll eat you last. He's still going to eat you. And Putin will not be satisfied until that he has taken all of Ukraine and really taken, his goal really is domination of all of Europe. That's been well documented. And so hopefully some of this geography helps you to have a understanding of what's going on in this war, in this invasion, and know better how to pray. Again, pray for the refugees who are having to flee out of these areas to Dnipro. Pray for the church to have wisdom of how to help. As I mentioned, Vladimir's and Lilia's boys are going up here to Krasny Armeysk. It's now called Pokrovsky, over to here, and they're going to just be working their way up the front. Pray for their protection, for all their teams. Pray for them. They had a cafeteria there in Krasny Armeysk. It was bombed yesterday, and so they have no water. They're actually going to have to cook over a fire. So continue to pray for the church as they arise and as they minister to the least of these. At present, there are 15,000 civilians still trapped in Severodonetsk. And as we've said, anywhere that Russia controls, there are atrocities happening. So pray for the people in the occupied territories as well. And so hopefully that's helpful. Also, hopefully you've stepped up. You've put your information. You've put your testimonies in, right? The things that God's doing. You also put your you've put down the prayer strategies and things you're going after. And then if you need prayer, say need prayer. And I want to invite our teams, but also you. Let's pray for one another. Let's see God move in the same specific ways that we've seen him move in Ukraine, move in each other's lives. And finally, if you'd like to help Vladimir and Lilia and the church Благая Весть, Good News in Dnipro, as they minister with so many churches throughout Eastern Ukraine, go to ariselife.org/help-Ukraine. And we will continue to stand together and see the victories that God's going to bring in Ukraine. The next couple days, like I said, I'm going to be doing these, and I'm going to be giving you some of the background in Russia and Putin in the history. I'm going to be giving you a number of different of these segments to help you better understand the bigger picture and understanding. And then finally, we're going to be talking about what's the future? What are we praying towards? Where does this need to go? What does God want to do after the war? So it's going to be exciting, but so grateful for all of you all. Have an amazing, joy-filled day, and we'll see you tomorrow.